Hi everyone, Titus here for another Unreal Engine tutorial, and in this video we'll cover procedural content generation, or PCG for short, and how we can use it in conjunction with the landscape painting to create some static meshes. Let's not waste any time and just jump right into it. Okay, so I got the third person template map here. The first thing we'll need to do is, if you'll notice, if we try to create a PCG element, we can't. It's because we have to enable the plugin. So we'll come to plugins, and you can just search for procedural content generation, and then you just need to enable the top one here. Then you'll choose yes, and then you'll have to restart your editor. Okay, editor's back. Looks like we got an error message. It has to do with water body collision, which is not enabled on this map, so we can ignore it. And then the next thing we need to do is we actually need to create a landscape. So we're going to create a new map. We'll do File, New Level. You can do an empty level and just create your own open world landscape and shape it. Just to keep this tutorial short, I'm just going to choose the default open world one, which has a landscape already created. And this one will be good enough to demo this tutorial. So now this landscape currently has the default material, which I think is the grid. Yeah, so it's using this little grid. So we're gonna have to create a new material starting off. So we'll right click, choose material, and you can call it whatever you want. I'm gonna do m_landscape. We'll call it maybe layers. Then we're gonna double click, and I'm gonna dock this in my main window here. Now we can't use a traditional material. We actually need to collapse this. So it's a material attribute. So we'll check this little box here. It says use material attribute. It'll collapse it there. What we actually need is a landscape layer blend. So if you right click and just search for landscape, you'll get a couple different options, and then one of them will be a layer blend. So we'll choose that one. And in this one, it's nice because you can define as many layers as you want. Typically when you're doing this, you're going to be using textures that are actually useful. Like you would create a texture for grass, create a texture for gravel, dirt, water, you know, what have you. And then you just paint that, and it would create the static meshes using the PCG component in conjunction with your actual material. For this example, I'm going to keep it kind of simple, and I'm just going to use two colors, and then the two colors will paint on different static meshes. So in the layers, I'll add 2 layers, and then I'll expand them out, and I have to give them some names. So I think for the first one, we'll do trees, and then for the second example, I'll do rocks. Now you can't connect this to the landscape layers. If you do, it'll error out. I think that's the thing with 5.5. So I'm gonna disconnect it, save to get rid of it. And then what we can do is we can just finish building out the material. So what we need is a make material attribute. And then we can just simply press Control D to duplicate that because we need 2 of them. And then this is what we're actually going to be plugging in to the layer blend. So I'll do this one for trees and this one for rocks. And then just to make it easy so we can see what we're doing, I'll add some colors. So I'll hold 3, click in the graph to add a constant 3 node. And then I can hook these up into the base color, and we can give it some different colors. So trees, I think I'll use a green. And then rocks, maybe I'll use a red. And then we'll save the material. And actually I forgot to assign it. So now we should be able to connect it in here and we won't get an error. And then we can save it, and that is good to go. So we'll head back to our level. We're gonna select the landscape component in the inspector on the right-hand side. And now we have the landscape material slot open. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select the landscape we created, and then I can just click this little arrow so it pops it in. We're gonna lose the grid, and it's gonna basically just kind of go all black, but that's perfectly fine. That's exactly what we're looking for. So now we can begin to create the PCG component. So let's right click. You'll notice we now have a PCG option, and I'm just gonna use the standard PCG graph. And for this, we'll just call it PCG example. You can call it whatever, it doesn't matter. But once you have it, if you drag it into the scene, it creates this like little cube, and it's relatively small compared to our landscape. So what we can do is under the inspector, we could probably scale it up. So maybe I do 250 by 250. And you can see it's a lot bigger now, so I think this will work for this example. And then let's double click to open it up, and we can begin creating. So the first thing we'll want to do is we'll want to get the information from our landscape. So we can right click to get landscape data. That's pretty straightforward, right? It'll pull in that landscape info. We need to sample the surface data. So for the out pin, we can pull into a surface sampler. And then when you're working with PCG, there's two keys you want to remember. D is for debug, and then A is for attribute. You're going to be using these probably quite a bit when you're using this tool. So as an example, if we go back into the level, there's kind of nothing happening here. But if I go back to PCG and I press D to add that little debug node, and if we go back, you'll notice I got a bunch of cubes. So I can kind of see what the PCG component is attempting or trying to do before we start adding static meshes. Now, you'll notice it's very uniform and kind of standard. If you want to change like the size of all the PCG elements, you can control that through the point extends. I think the lower the value, the smaller it is. So say I do 50, 50, 50. Then we go back. Yeah, you see the cubes are smaller. And if I do 250, 250, 250, you'll see they're bigger. But I think for this example, I am just going to flip this to 100, which is the standard default. And then we'll just go with this. Now I do want to add a little bit of randomness to it because I think they're kind of plain. So we can pull off the out pin and do a transform points. And then I'm going to get rid of the debug node here. And then under transform points, we'll add a debug in here. And then you'll notice I can do an offset, I can add a rotation, and I can do a scale, all of which are good. So for the offset, I'll maybe dig it into the ground by -50 units. For the rotation, I'll be between 0 and 359 degrees. And then for the scale, I'll maybe go between 1 and 2. If we go back, you can see we have a much different picture. We have cubes of different sizes, different depths, and different rotations. So that looks pretty cool. I'm going to go back into my PCG and let's actually create something from this. So I can pull off this pin, and the node you'll want to use is a static mesh spawner. So if I select this, I can then add in a mesh entry, which currently we have 0. I'll just hit the little plus sign here. You can add as many as you want, but for this example, I'm just going to do 1. And then if I kind of drill down, there's a static mesh box. And then I can actually create, let's do a tree, I think we're doing for this one. I'll do a pine. If I go back, it's kind of hard to see because I still have the cubes. So I can go back and do debug to turn it off. And that way I'm only looking at the end result. So now we have some trees, different rotations kind of laid out. And on its face value, that's kind of cool, but it's not really useful, right? Because it basically just spawns a bunch of them inside this grid. You kind of want a way to control that, and there's a number of different ways to do it. Painting is just one such example. So the other element I wanted to call out is the attribute. So if we push A, it'll add an attribute node, and then you can come down and expand it out and drill down, and you can see the various different attributes or items that you can kind of filter or go off of. You can also add in elements to this this little graph here, and that's kind of what we did with this material. So we're basically going to create some entries here, which they're currently not showing up. So for this material that we made, we created 2 elements for trees and rocks. Let's actually get those to show up now. So if I select my landscape, remember we added the material to it. So let's actually go into landscape mode. And I'm going to get rid of my content drawer to get a little extra space. We can then move into the paint mode. And then you'll notice near the bottom, there's a layer section, but currently there's no layers. There's a little button right here that says create layers from the assigned material. So it'll basically pull on the layers we created earlier. So if we just click this here, I then have my trees and my rocks. And I don't think it'll show up in the PCG component just yet. So if I like, yeah, I don't see it here. Maybe if I click A and then add it back, we should see trees and rocks. We don't. So I think you actually have to paint with it. So if I maybe, there's a few ways you can, like we can add a like a normalized weight layer, so it'll like push and pull from each other, but I'm just gonna do regular painting. So if I add a paint layer here, whoops, oh, you have to create. So we're gonna hit the little plus sign. We'll do a weight blended layer, that's fine. And then I'm gonna save it in my PCG landscaping folder. And then we might as well do that for the rocks as well. Which I don't know why it makes us create it first, because that is a little bit weird. So if I hit this for the rocks, and then I do the weight blended layer, and then I'll save it in the same folder. And then it creates the data asset there. And then now I should be able to actually kind of paint around, which that is working. But I don't want to really start off with the whole world being green. That could be useful, but for this example, I am going to delete both items. And then I can just re-add them. There we go. And then I'm just going to select trees, and then I can begin painting. And then if I select rocks, I can begin painting. Now you'll notice there's a little bit of green when I paint. That probably has to do with the brush fall off. I'm going to lower that to 0. And then I'm going to set the tool strength to 1. So now when I paint, it doesn't add any green. And when I do green, it won't add any red. So pretty straightforward. So. Okay, so now we actually have some data. So let's go back to PCG, and you'll notice we have 2 new columns. We have a trees and a rock. And then we have some values here. Some are 0, some are 1. And then you can kind of go through and you'll see there's kind of data all the way up and down through them. So we can now use this information to sort of filter where PCG places the static mesh. The way we do that, let's just give ourselves a little bit of room. And we could pull off this into an attribute filter. And then you have the inside result and the outside result. I'm going to use the inside, plug it into the static mesh component. I'm going to break the other connection we had. And then if I go back, you see there's no trees. So now we need to define the filter. So we can target an attribute. So I'm going to target, for this one, we'll do trees. You can do whatever, but I'm doing trees. Just make sure it's something in your material, right? Like one of whatever items you're setting here, basically. So I'll do trees. We'll do a constant threshold, and then I'll say, I won't do 0. I'll maybe give a little bit of a buffer, 0.2, and then we can do greater than. So as long as the value is greater than 0.2, spawn a tree. And then if I go over here, you can see on the green, it is currently spawning a some trees here. And then if I did the opposite, like if I did less than, and then I go over here, it's basically spawning wherever there isn't or is not a tree, or I'm sorry, is not any green. So for this one, I think greater than works just fine. Maybe I'll do greater or equal. I don't think it matters. And yeah, okay, so, oh, I don't want to say my level just yet, but now you can see I can paint along and it will create some trees. And then if I select the red, I can paint along and it will get rid of anything in there. Now it's placing trees on these because they don't currently have any data layers. So if I just go around and add something there, this obviously wouldn't be an issue if you're going to be setting up your entirety of your world. But it is for me right now. So basically if you add something, you see it kind of fills in. But all right, so we got trees showing up wherever it's green. Now let's have something show up where it's red. So if we go back to PCG, you could just go on the outside filter. The problem with that one is it'll do the red and it'll do everywhere where there's nothing too. So, you know, for this example, I think I'll actually come off the transform into a separate attribute filter. And then I will do just another static mesh spawner. And then this filter, we're going to do much the same. We'll probably just do rocks greater than, we'll use a constant threshold, 0.2. And then for the static mesh, I just have to add in an actual mesh entry. And if I search for rock, got some rock debris. So maybe we'll do rock debris number 2. And then let's go back here, and they're pretty small, but you can kind of see it. There's some rocks there. So now you can basically go around and you could paint in some rocks wherever you need them, or you can switch to trees, paint the trees in, kind of like whatever you need. Now, obviously, this example is kind of silly because I'm using just green and red paint. You're going to be using textures that are based on like gravel, mud, you know, actual dirt. And where it's cool is you can create and define your worlds and then just have, you know, like say you paint along a river, right? So you use PCG to spawn in trees everywhere, but then you get trees in your river. Well, you don't want that. So what you can do is paint the river, say like, you know, a river texture, and then PCG can go off that and say, oh, this is a river texture. I'm not going to spawn any trees here, but maybe I'll spawn, you know, like reeds or, you know, some type of aquatic foliage. And it just basically automates a lot of your workflows where you can kind of just get a base level setup very quickly, and then you can kind of come in and fine tune it with some, you know, manual painting. So it's pretty handy. But all right, everyone, we'll cut the video here, but I hope you found some informative value that you can take into your own projects. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.